listener production.
Hey, Chris Spyrou with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Albo might be having some success overseas, rubbing shoulders with the world's top leaders at the moment, but can his government's plan to rewrite a 25-year-old law survive the political crossfire back home and actually do what it's promising?
From everything that I've seen, I have not seen loopholes be tightened or responsibility be shed more to business. I've seen loopholes remain and a few new ones thrown in. That
deep dive into the government's long-awaited environmental bill and whether it could actually protect the environment is coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Wednesday, the 29th of October.
Hey Chris, and to you listening, we're starting in the Middle East where Israel's military has this morning carried out powerful and intense strikes across multiple sites in Gaza. Within minutes of Benjamin Netanyahu's office announcing the strikes, Hamas's armed wing responded, saying it was postponing the handover of another hostage's body due today, warning that Israeli escalation, quote, will hinder the search, excavation and recovery of remaining bodies. Now, the statement from the PM's office didn't specify why the strikes had been ordered, but it follows reports that Hamas had opened fire at Israeli forces still in Rafah in southern Gaza.
It also follows accusations made just hours ago by the Israeli government that Hamas was trying to deceive them and had violated the US-brokered ceasefire, claiming forensic testing of remains handed over yesterday belonged to a body already recovered from the Strip 2 years ago. In its statement, Hamas accused Israel of, quote, fabricating false pretexts in preparation for taking new aggressive steps. Now, according to Gaza's government media office, Israel has broken the deal 125 times since the ceasefire kicked in on October the 10th, including killing over 90 people.
Young girls are being hunted by men online and being coerced to carry out acts of violence on themselves, their family members and pets. According to the Australian Federal Police, it's a new twisted form of gamification that's sparked in online networks that's not motivated by sex or money, simply amusement and popularity. The AFP says it's announced a new task force to crack down on the behaviour, as well as a broader goal of reducing online harm that is having real-life effects in Australia and abroad.
It also says it's becoming increasingly concerned about how social media and other online domains are being used to pull young people into extremism, terrorism and other violent trends. And while those involved don't necessarily subscribe to one ideology, authorities are noticing more violence, extremism, sadism, Nazism, Satanism and nihilism. The AFP's dubbed them crime influencers who are motivated by hurting others and creating anarchy, with most of their targets teenage girls or preteens.
Yeah, and so far around 59 people, both international and domestic, have been found to be taking part in these related online crime networks. Of those that were Australian, all were aged between 17 and 20 years old, and overall police say that those involved are overwhelmingly Western, English-speaking young men and boys.
Celebrations by pro-queer and trans groups have been short-lived after the Queensland Supreme Court overturned Australia's first ban on puberty blockers, only for the state's health minister to issue a new order hours later.
Gender-affirming care is life-changing and often life-saving healthcare for trans young people.
The state's controversial freeze on puberty blockers for adolescent teens in public hospitals was first introduced in January after revelations children as young as 12 were being prescribed them, in some cases without parental knowledge. Now, yesterday, Justice Peter Callaghan ruled in favour of a parent of a transgender child who brought a legal challenge to that ban.
Yeah, that's right. And he ruled that the directive establishing the ban was made improperly and was unlawful, finding health service executives were given just 22 minutes to consider it. Now, the parent who brought the case can't be identified, but here's what one of her legal representatives had to say outside court on her behalf.
This has been a harrowing and traumatising ordeal, and I'm incredibly relieved that it is over and that justice has been achieved for my child.
Now, fast forward just 6 hours after that ruling and those statements are made outside court, Queensland's Health Minister Tim Nicholls issued new orders banning public doctors from prescribing the blockers last night. Queensland's Premier David Crisafulli is yet to comment. However, last week he did defend the initial ban, saying he believed it was lawful.
The Minister conducted himself in a very respectful way. There were some horrible allegations that were raised, and our first responsibility is to keep kids safe.
And it's understood that the January ban affected about 491 children on wait lists in Queensland. The nearly 600 teens who were already on treatment plans for puberty blockers were able to continue accessing their treatments. Now, importantly, this judgment was just a judicial review of the directive, a challenge of the process and kind of how the ban was communicated to health officials. It wasn't a judicial decision made on whether the ban was good or bad.
Neo-Nazi leader Thomas Sewell has been found not guilty of behaving in an offensive manner after a several-day hearing in a Victorian court. The 32-year-old was accused of leading a white supremacist rally through Ballarat in 2023, where he and others chanted things like Australia for the white man, send the rest home, and no more Chinamen in Ballarat. Sewell claimed the protest was political but not offensive, and yesterday the court heard from a member of the public who witnessed the rally, who claimed it just looked like a bunch of boys going for a walk. Nothing stood out as offensive to me, but that's just me.
Now, Mr. Sewell told the court the prosecution had failed to prove his behaviour was offensive, which the magistrate agreed with. Magistrate Mark Waddell says he wasn't convinced that the rally was deeply or seriously insulting, as Victoria Police claimed. He went on to say that behaviour deemed unacceptably offensive by some may not trouble others at all, and that with new fringe groups popping up all the time, societies and attitudes are continuing to evolve. And basically, for the prosecution to prove the behaviour was a crime, they need to demonstrate it was so insulting that it required criminal law interference.
I don't know about you, Chris, but I have to say this outcome shocked me a little bit, because while I understand people have differing views and political opinions, and as we've learned, very differing stances on immigration, for example, that's not what this specific group was chanting about. They were shouting and holding signs that were very clearly about race and ethnicity, which they're protected attributes in Australia. The definition of hate speech says any public expressions that offend, insult or humiliate people based on these attributes are unlawful. So I'm a bit perplexed as to how this doesn't breach either the federal or state discrimination laws.
Yeah, and just looking at this story as well, and the key witness, he does appear to be Caucasian, so he doesn't look to be part of the groups that Sewell's comments would offend, or let's be real, the groups that Sewell frequently insults and attacks. And look, I think the point to be made here is perhaps this has boiled down to legal process, perhaps this has boiled down to the way that the police have brought the case. Like the judge said, they didn't prove it beyond that threshold. So interesting to know, had the case been brought in a different way, if we'd be talking about a different outcome this morning.
And just when you thought school and exams couldn't be any more annoying, Chris, well, now it's come out that not one, but 8 Queensland state high schools have taught their Year 12 students the wrong stimulus for their end-of-year ancient history exam that they're due to sit today. Now, yesterday you would have heard in our Arvo ep about Brisbane State High, but now we've learned it wasn't just them. There's at least 7 other schools, possibly more, that have been teaching students about the wrong Roman leader all semester.
Yeah, that's right. They were meant to be taught about Julius Caesar. Instead, they learnt about his nephew Augustus. But what's worse is these tests count for a quarter of the students' overall grades, Tara. The QCAA says it's now offering those affected a chance to submit an illness and misadventure application to get special consideration applied to the results, as well as a full day of support for students to run through practice exam questions and exemplars.
I'm sorry, but if that was me and everyone else had months and months of researching this topic and I had to cram in one day, not saying I've never done that, but I would not be happy with that answer. I think that they should either scrap the result entirely or then give them more time to study. But I'm sure the Year 12s would have something to say about that. They don't want to be kept in school any longer. So
No, and I don't want to out myself as a nerd, but I was such a nerd during HSC. This, Tara, would have sent me into a tailspin.
Yeah.
I feel so bad for these kids this morning. Now, look, before we go, we do want to wish a very happy birthday to the man who is responsible for bringing you these headlines every single morning, our audio editor, Matthew. Matthew, happy birthday, legend.
Happy birthday.
And please do not edit this out of the episode. That is it for our headlines for today. Coming up next is my deep dive looking into Labor's long-awaited environmental bill and whether it's actually capable of protecting the environment and creating any change. Stick around, that deep dive is coming up for you next. The next 2 weeks in Australian politics are being framed as the biggest test of Anthony Albanese's prime ministership since his re-election in May. It's all over something the coalition says will suffocate Australian businesses, while the Greens reckon it'll destroy the environment, and without one of them on board, it's doomed. It's the government's plan to rewrite our 25-year-old environmental laws. They sit in the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, or the EPBC, and it comes nearly 5 years after a review found they were not fit for purpose. The same review that's passed through the hands of 3 environment ministers, including Susan Lee, Tanya Plibersek, and now Murray Watt. And while October heat records are being smashed across the country, flash flooding's hitting parts of our east coast, and a toxic algal bloom is killing fish and closing beaches in South Australia, arguably there's no better time to be tabling this legislation. So what exactly is being proposed? Why has it got what feels like all sides of politics fired up? And can this latest attempt actually get through when so many have failed before? Leanne Minshull is the co-CEO of the Australian Institute, and she joins me now. Leanne, welcome to the briefing. What are the main changes being proposed at the moment?
There's so many changes and there's so much that we don't know because the consultation process on this hasn't been brilliant. I've tried to engage in a number of ways and I've got bits and pieces of the legislation. So it's really hard to know exactly what's going to be put forward. So the Liberal Party is not happy with it and the Greens aren't happy with it. And yeah, I think that was a bit predictable. Originally, the minister said that he wanted to get the Liberal Party and the Greens all on side. The Liberal Party can't get on side with their own team, so I don't know how he thought he was going to bring everyone along, but here we are.
I guess one of the headline changes or one of the headline introductions is that they're looking at introducing Australia's first National Environmental Protection Agency. Can you explain to us why that's significant and how that would get the ball rolling in this space?
I think a strong EPA that's independent and that's able to give enforcement orders for people to stop a particular project if they're breaking the conditions of their approval. I think all of that's really valuable. But when we don't know what type of things are going to be assessed, what the national environmental standards are going to be, whether the government is going to keep a lot of the powers to itself or whether it's going to devolve it to the states, it makes the EPA a little bit nonsensical in a way because it's like you've got a policeman who has the power to do stuff, but you don't know if you're driving too fast or too slow. So good in principle, good in theory, but without knowing what they're actually going to police, it's hard to judge whether this will be useful or not.
What's prompted this reform is this review that's passed a few hands of government now. It's passed the coalition. It's also passed Labor in the last term and Labor this term. The key line in that is that the environmental legislation that we have is not fit for purpose. In what ways is the current legislation being exploited or having really low impact?
So the current legislation is failing. Everybody agrees it's failing. So people say that it takes too long. I would note that most things that go to the EPBC for approval are actually approved in the end. But overwhelmingly, everybody says it takes too long. And then on the environmental side, it's clearly not protecting our biodiversity or our nature because we've got one of the highest levels of species extinction in the world. You know, we're winning there. Yay, Australia. So there's nobody who says that this is doing well for the environment. And I think that's the problem with the legislation as well, because from my view, I can't see how they've sat down and said this isn't working for the environment. So let's do a few things for the environment that we know we need to do. Let's stop native forest logging. They've said that's off the table. 72% of global emissions come from fossil fuels. But in our legislation, they haven't said, let's have a climate trigger to assess a project for its impact upon the climate. So without those two things centrally, then you kind of get down to the lower hanging fruit in a lot of ways. And it feels a little bit like they've just really had a good look at what we need to do to fast track development.
I think the general sentiment among the Australian public at the moment when it comes to environmental laws is that a lot of it hangs on the individual to do specific things, to do better for the environment. So there's been calls for us as consumers to buy paper straws or to, invest or purchase more eco-friendly things. But it doesn't feel like in Australia there's strong onus on companies or corporations. Is the legislation that's being tabled or looks like it's going to be tabled this week, does it shift the onus in any way that it puts more responsibilities on the people or the businesses who are arguably contributing to some of our greatest pollutants or some of our greatest things that are being emitted?
From everything that I've seen, I have not seen loopholes be tightened or responsibility be shed more to business. I've seen loopholes remain and a few new ones thrown in. There's a restriction on the time that people can challenge the approval. They're thinking about reducing the approval time to 28 days. That's quite a short time if you're thinking about a local community group that has some genuine concerns. I think the other thing to remember is that even under the existing laws, when there was any threat of them actually working, the government stepped in and made an industry carve-out for the salmon industry in Tasmania. So there's a Maugean skate in Tasmania. It's the only place in the world that it's found. It's got links back down to the dinosaur era. So it's survived a couple of ice ages, but I don't think it's going to survive the current government and the salmon industry because the science was saying that there's some real problems down there, and a challenge was made to the EPBC Act, and the government and the Prime Minister clearly stepped in and gave a carve-out for that industry. So, yeah, look, I'm a hopeful person. I'm basically an optimist, but I'm even being challenged over these past few days.
Now, look, another part to this, Murray Watt, the Environment Minister, was also talking about how companies could be fined up to $825 million here, and individuals could face fines of up to $1.6 million. And, there's also this idea that they could be forced to give up any financial gains that they've made by breaching environmental law. Is that a significant improvement here in this space? If that were to go through, is that good legislation?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's bringing it up to the kind of provisions that are available to other companies. So Microsoft was automatically renewing people's subscriptions, but at a much higher price than what it was the year before. And so there was discussion about what powers the ACCC had, and they've got powers like the ones that you've just mentioned. So to be taking the environment just as seriously as we take breaches of the Corporations Act or the Taxation Act is a really, really good thing. But I guess I'd just go back to the point. If the policeman is allowed to charge you $1,000 for speeding, that's good. But it's no good if the speed limit's 300 kilometres an hour.
Why do you think it is in Australia environmental reform struggles so much to get over the line?
Because I don't think anybody's genuinely interested that's held government for the past 30 years. I haven't seen a brave government take a stance for the environment since decisions like Bob Carr preserved a lot of wilderness in New South Wales. Of course, we all know Bob Hawke saved the Franklin, but these are all a distant memory now. I can't think of anything that's happened where any of the government has put the environment first. So the environment's just getting worse and worse and worse. People are really scared. They're grieving for the environment that we're losing, and they're really angry that our government's not doing anything to protect us, and they're angry that fossil fuel companies can exploit our natural resources, pay hardly any tax. Gas companies pay less in petroleum rent and resource tax than our kids pay in HECS. There's a lot of stuff to be angry about, and I think it's past time where politicians can just try and fix the politics. They're actually going to have to fix what's in front of us. And I think this Labor government can do it. I'm hopeful.
Well, there was hope on the horizon when Labor came to power in 2022 and Tanya Plibersek was the Environment Minister. She got pretty close to getting reform over the line, but it seemed that fizzled out. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, it didn't fizzle out, my friend. It was chopped off at the knees. So when Tanya Plibersek was the minister, she did some good work, and she worked really constructively with Sarah Hanson-Young from the Greens. They were halfway down the aisle with the deal, and the Prime Minister scuttled it. So I don't call that a fizzle out. I call that a chop off.
There were reports at the time that Albo personally got involved after he was lobbied by WA's Premier Roger Cook. So it feels like now both are in very different political positions. Albo won the election in a landslide. Roger Cook still has a really strong hold on WA state politics, and he's polling quite well at the moment. Do you think now is the time that change might get through and there won't be a last-minute slash from the Prime Minister?
I don't think there can be a last-minute cutting off from the Prime Minister, because I think Minister Watt's very different to Minister Plibersek in the way that he's approaching this. So you're right. The politics are actually right. It's the time for the Labor to lead and deliver what, it needs to keep its people safe, and it's not doing that by not protecting the environment and the climate. And you're right, Roger Cook was, the Premier of WA, was actually saying, I forced the Prime Minister to, so what, Roger? World's burning. Get on our bus, man, because you can't escape it. The climate disaster risk report showed us really clearly that absolutely nobody in Australia is going to escape the chaos from climate change. Nobody. Doesn't matter if you're a Prime Minister, doesn't matter if you're a Premier, we're all in for it. And now's the time to be Team Australia for the climate and for the environment. So scientifically, we've got a closing window to stabilise our climate and protect our biodiversity. That's clear. That's just science. And then politically, do we think that there's going to be an even larger Labor majority at the next election? I don't know. And they've got a massive majority, and we've got a lot of Greens, and we've got a lot of climate-aligned independents. So if not now, when?
If you were to make a prediction, if you were to get your crystal ball out, who do you think the Albanese government or the Labor government is more likely to strike a deal with when it comes to this issue and getting this through the Senate? Do you think it is the Greens and potentially the Independents, or do you think it is the coalition?
Oh, I think it's going to have to be the Greens. I really do have my political goggles on, because if you look at the way that the Liberal Party is operating at the moment, they haven't even agreed if they should have a net zero policy. And that's fine. I think it's good that we're a democracy. Everybody's got different ideas. I love a contest of ideas. But at the moment, Team Liberal don't actually have a solid position. So I'd be shocked if they're not getting really pressure by the Business Council of Australia and the Minerals Council of Australia. So maybe the politics will align. There is some talk about splitting the bills and going for the business-friendly parts with the Liberal Party and then the environmentally friendly parts with the Greens. But I don't know, I think that's pretty politically dicey as well. I really thought they were going to try and get something through this year, and I think they'll still try. But I was thinking about this last night, just thinking how they've really kind of, they went out to wedge the other two and they've double wedged themselves in the face. I reckon they're kind of walking around with metaphorical axes in his head this morning.
Leanne, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks, Chris. Nice to talk. Bye.
That was co-CEO of the Australian Institute, Leanne Minshull, speaking with me there. And that is it for this episode of The Briefing. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something new, why not flick it over to a mate? And while you're there, be sure to leave us a rate and a review. I'm Chris Spyrou. I'll catch you next time.